Welcome to the Future of Medicine podcast. My name is Dr. Aaron Wenzel, and my hope is simple, that this show helps you along your journey to become the healthiest, strongest, and most vibrant version of you. This podcast is brought to you by Brentwood MD. Brentwood MD is located in Nashville, Tennessee, and provides best-in-class concierge primary care. Learn more about our innovative approach to primary care at brentwoodmd.com. Now, let's explore the future of medicine. Hey everybody, before we jump into this episode, here's a little context. This is a talk that I did in Nashville along with a dear friend of mine, Zane Griggs, who I have interviewed in the past, one of the most talented and thoughtful fitness and nutrition experts in the world, speaking to a room full of very successful business owners and entrepreneurs regarding quality of life, longevity, prevention, kind of cutting edge things that are going on. And I found it to be an incredibly useful conversation. The energy in the room was really great. The questions were fantastic. And we decided to repurpose that talk for this episode and share it with our listeners because I just think the quality of conversation that came from the presentations and the questions was incredibly high level. And I think that you're going to enjoy it. So no more delays. Let's jump in.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to New York, Nashville. We appreciate everybody being here. Okay, it's going to be a great 2025. This is our 5th year of having these wonderful business meetings. We appreciate everybody participating. We have some founding partners, and I don't see, obviously, Alliance Bernstein, our wonderful host today, but also Ankara. We have Lockton who has joined us. And so we've got a really great group that is keeping this wonderful experience going. So I want to thank everybody who's been a part of this in the past. Obviously, welcome new people. And also take a moment to tell you a little bit about Barton. And we say that we are better law. There's a good reason for that. Because we are. We actually understand business. We operate like a business. We have our CEO with us here today, Roger Barton. So he helps run the firm so that the rest of us can do what we love, which is to practice law. So Barton has a very robust group. We do L&E, we do IP, we do cybersecurity. So if you have any of those issues that potentially face your business, and if you are in business, I can guarantee you do, I like to say I handle contracts, compliance, and crazy. And crazy does keep me the busiest. So if your business needs help in business, please think of Barton. And on that note of health, the presentation today I'm pretty excited about. I looked it up, and about 70% of us think that we're, very healthy. I think we might be lying a little bit, but we're trying to get there. You have business health, but there's no point in anything really unless you have personal health. And so today, I think we're going to hear some great information about what we can do to keep ourselves healthy, which makes us more efficient and more prosperous. So without further ado, I'm going to turn you over to Miss Danielle Spence, who is my favorite advisor. And I know she's here with Adam Sanseveri, who brought Alliance Bernstein to Nashville, which has been a fabulous, fabulous undertaking. So take it away, Danielle.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Jen. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. I just want to say thank you to Barton for letting us host the very first New York Nashville Alliance of 2025. We are so excited to do that. Love to partner with all of you. So at Bernstein, we advise the individual holistically. But what is your wealth worth if you don't have the health to go with it? The issue could be, what if you have this great longevity, but you don't have the great wealth to go with it, right? And so then we could have an issue. Great longevity, great wealth, we want to make sure that we are planning appropriately to get you to 100 or past that, right? And so today we have our fearless leader and one of my favorite people, Mr. Adam Sansavari, who, as JK said, is the head of our private wealth group here at our global headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee. He is incredibly passionate about longevity and health and performance. He is a Ironman triathlete, and in fact was in med school before he left to start his own business. And so I'm very excited for all of you to hear from Mr. Adam Sansavari today and the rest of our panel. So again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. And this is a topic of great passion, so we're excited to be doing this. It's not the first time I've gotten to work with these two great gentlemen. We're actually looking forward to doing this again, but more focused just around women's health in the fall, so stay tuned for that. But I'm so excited to be up here with these two gentlemen. Come on up, guys. We're going to get into an insightful conversation around longevity and optimizing health, not about treating illness, but preventing it and enhancing quality of life. And these two I'm lucky to work with in numerous ways, both personally and professionally. And so Dr. Aaron Wenzel is the founder of Brentwood MD. He's a leading concierge doctor, author, and entrepreneur. And my good friend Zane Griggs here, an expert in training, nutrition, overall metabolic health, author, and all about being fit after 50. And as you can tell, we got a strong sneaker game going up here. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. We've got so much to cover, and having done a number of these before, it is absolutely impossible to get through everything. So we're going to try to have a very fast-paced and interesting conversation for about 45 minutes, and then we'll try to save 15 minutes for questions, knowing that we're probably going to spawn a lot of those and not get through all the ground that we do want to cover. So let's dive right in for the sake of time and set the stage a little bit on understanding health risks. I think it's a good place to always, set the stage. So before we get into longevity, that big picture, the top causes of death today, 10 out of 10 are chronic diseases, and 6 out of the 10 are metabolic related. What does this tell us about the current state of health and prevention? Aaron, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
First, pull these up for us. So,
first of all, it's a pleasure to be in front of all of you all talking about something that I talk about every day of my life. And so before I jump into this, as a physician, I take conflict of interest really seriously. Nothing I talk about today I'm being paid for. I'm here because I want to be on the technologies and the tools that I'm going to be mentioning. It's only because I believe in them. So since that's out of the way. My North Star is to help people live a long time and feel great. And what I've landed on, the most useful way to do that is to reverse engineer the most likely thing to take you off the earth. And that's just data. And so out of the top 10 killers of human beings, which we've furnished here, you can see very clearly that 7 of them are directly or indirectly linked to what I would call metabolic disease. Metabolic disease is a really fancy term for energy dysregulation. Essentially, we take forms of unusable energy in the food, like you're eating, and then we convert it into usable energy. And when that energy process goes awry, you get metabolic disease, and metabolism is the process of taking this potential energy and making it usable. And it's profound when you think about the things that take us off the earth: heart disease, cancer, stroke, liver disease, diabetes. This is a big deal. No disease will outpace diabetes worldwide over the next 20 years. It is the health epidemic on the planet. And so all roads lead then to how do you delay metabolic disease? How can you, if you really get good at delaying, can you actually prevent it? And that's where a lot of my effort and energy is spent.
So, yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Well, I would say that metabolic disease is the disease currently that is shortening our lives. I think it was in 2000, the estimate was that where we finally hit a point where our extending life expectancy was starting to shorten. It was in 2000. It was due primarily to these diseases with diabetes. The estimate was shortening your life by about 11 years. So these are the diseases that are killing us. These are the diseases we're spending as much as we are on our national defense, trying to prevent or trying to actually manage rather than cure or
It's mostly management.
It's managed disease. In other words, who wants to live with disease for the last 10 or 20 years of your life? Not me. So my North Star, as you put it, my goal is to help people avoid them completely, because 120 years ago, 1901, the obesity rate was 1%.
Wow.
Cardiovascular disease was almost unheard of. Most cardiologists never saw a heart attack. Type 2 diabetes was probably less than 1/3%, maybe even 0.03%. And fatty liver was for alcoholics. It was not. Now we have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease outpacing fatty liver disease for liver transplants. And it's like 25% of the population, I think, getting back. So these are new diseases for us as humans, and for them to be the primary killers or the ones that inhibit our health and, you might say, ruin the last 10 years of our life. I believe it's preventable, and unfortunately, the focus has been on treating symptoms, and not getting to the root cause. And so that's my North Star, is finding the root cause.
Which we'll get into, and I'm an economist by education, and so it's interesting when I talk about that a lot more than I talk about this. But when we look at a topic that's very common in today's headlines today about the national deficit, the phrase that I did not come up with but that I love is the U.S. government is an insurance company with an army. And if we look at one of the major problems with our economy, and you look at the federal budgets and all these things that we're talking about of cutting spending and all the things you hear in the headlines, if you look at it in a pie chart, it's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, defense spending, and then everything else is like 11 to 13%. And so what we're talking about cutting and DOGE and all this kind of stuff is not really going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle is fixing our healthcare system so that these costs can come down. And so a big part of that ties back into obviously what we do as investors and people looking at the economy. But to stay on topic, so key pillars of metabolic health and what the things that people need to focus on. So let's just start maybe, Zane, how should people be training to optimize their metabolic health? And then we'll get into some other layers of that.
Well, training, I think that the crucial part, the part that should be most consistent with, is some level of resistance training. So something where you're creating fatigue in a short period, like within 3 minutes for a particular muscle, because of the insulin sensitivity it creates, the fact that we need muscle mass to store glucose, which is a lot of times the problem with metabolic disease is how do we manage glucose? And so it's a great way to reverse glucose. But training to focus on resistance training with, I think as we age, we have to be a little smarter, not beat ourselves up with it. So that means, in my opinion, polarizing cardio, meaning that we focus on like the higher end and the very low end and kind of stay away from the middle, which tends to create a lot of inflammation and fatigue. So recovery becomes a real important part. And so we can't talk about training without recovery, in my opinion, especially as we get past 40, because recovery and inflammation and stress and responsibilities and all those things count as stressors to recover from. So training needs to be smart. 2 or 3 days a week of some strength training, resistance training of some kind, some high intensity training that is in intervals. So like a sprinting, something 15-second to 1 minute intervals, high end with rest in between, 3 to 6 bouts of that a couple times a week. And then just a lot of basic movement, like leisure movement, walking, riding a bike, playing pickleball, something that you enjoy. Could be yoga, Pilates, those kind of things where you have just kind of nice movement as often as possible.
Yeah. And Aaron, as you think about metabolic health and your patients and the people you're talking to, what are the key things you're talking to them about as it relates to metabolic health?
I generally, in my world, they're called Wenzelisms. So the Wenzelism around this is I tend to think that all meaningful progress in one's health starts in one of three buckets: the way you feed your body, the way you move your body, and the way you recover your body, essentially. There are some outlier elements, but those are the primary things. And so the science and data would tell you that there's no evidence that there's anything more significant you could do for your future self than strength train, currently as we understand the data. That may change over time, but if there's only one thing that you got out of this talk and you're not lifting 2 to 3 times a week, that's the single greatest thing you could do for your current and future self in terms of longevity, improving the quality and quantity of your life. Ironically, you can't outrun your mouth. So thing number 2 is, how do you feed your body? And so no amount of training will undo a diet that doesn't map with your goals. Like, there has to be congruency between those two things, or especially as you age, because you lose the neurologic and the neurohormonal environment on the back end as we age, where you just stop getting the musculoskeletal infrastructure. And then recovery. Sleep is probably the most underrated human activity all time. It has been moving up my personal leaderboard in terms of significance. I, like probably a lot of people in this room, punted sleep my whole life because it was like the hack. I could just push through and perform. Turns out at 50, it's a massive vulnerability, and I have problems that I'm managing now because for 13 years I ran an emergency department and didn't sleep a lot, and started a business and started a family and all of these things that we've all done. Big blind spot. I just don't know how it's not the most important thing. We spend 1/3 of our entire time on Earth sleeping. Just area under the curve, total exposure over total time. I don't know how it can't be number one. We'll see how this plays out over time. But sleep, diet, and training.
Yeah. If anyone reads Peter Attia, there's an extreme example in there that makes me laugh, but also I think gives hopes to people who want to have a balanced lifestyle. And he says that if you train, lift weights heavy and do that, and you drink, you smoke, and you eat fast food, you will live longer if you don't do any of those things and don't train. And that may be a little extreme, but that made me laugh because people want to have a drink and have some fast food every once in a while, but it's such an important thing to make the point.
Yeah, there's a subgroup of folks who love working out, and it's the gateway to like not fixing the other things.
Yeah.
And this is why I always say, like, you can't outrun your mouth. Like, you need all of these things, but like there's a lot of like synergies between these buckets.
Yeah. So we could stay on this topic forever, but I want to move into longevity and biohacking because it's such a hot topic right now. There's so many trends emerging. So Zane, what are some of the most exciting advancements or discussions happening in the longevity or biohacking space right now that you're paying attention to?
There's always a lot of conversations, and which ones come to the surface and last is the hard part to decipher. I think, as far as I think of integrative strategies that bring in, so there's biohacking and then there's some medicine that can come into that. So I think hormone replacement therapy, which is, some would say, well, maybe that's biohacking, maybe it isn't, but I think it is a form that uses the current medical integrative strategies that we have available. That's pretty solid. It'd be hard to find one that has a more leverage than hormone replacement therapy. But from there, with the biohacker space, we have things like NAD, which is stimulating the energy. We talk about energy, it stimulates the mitochondria. Methylene blue is sort of competing with that coming in there, but it's a little, finding a good source is not great. Hyperbaric is a big one. IHT, which is an intermittent hypoxic training. So basically, where you're getting varying amounts of oxygen pressure, like you were basically simulating, and you would do this at rest, but you'd simulate going from sea level to 20,000 feet and then back down and back up in a 30-minute session. So you're basically changing your pressure, and that would also challenge or train the mitochondria, and everything comes back to that mitochondria because that's where our cellular energy is created. So really, most of it is centered around mitochondrial health. But I think those are some of the bigger ones. There's also some electrostim kind of suits that are available for people training with, whether they have injuries or they're not crazy about going to the gym or they just want some help with, they don't want to lift heavy weights or whatever. So you have these electrostim suits you can put on that stimulate muscle contraction.
Tricking your body.
Basically, it's stimulating more muscle fibers, and you can just be moving body weight and find that fatigue, that level of fatigue, and get close to failure with electrostim. And then a lot around recovery. I mean, it's just frequency medicine is the big one out there, which is kind of like one of those where it's emerging and what's real and what isn't, but using frequencies because we all do have a frequency. The earth has a frequency. And so everything from bed sheets that have a grounding mechanism with threads going through them that create a grounding effect that are plugged into your wall, basically. So it's creating an electrical field there, like you would find sleeping on the ground. Yeah. So it's creating that grounding mechanism too. I could talk forever about this, but it's just it's endless, and the hard part is truly weaving through it, even when you're familiar with it.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah, where's the bigger leverage points?
Yeah, it makes sense. For those that may not remember high school biology, mitochondria is the energy part of the cell, and as we age, the effectiveness and the energy production, they die off, and you can have lower energy. So a lot of this, as I've thought about it, is about tricking the body that it's younger than it is, or re-engaging parts of the body that have maybe broken down with age. Right. One of my favorite sayings in biohacking is, after the age of 24, we're a depreciating asset. And interesting way to tie it together. But Zane, you started with hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
I think that's gotten a lot of bad rap or confusing things. So I'd love to hear the doctor's perspective on hormone replacement therapy. Is it safe? Should people be looking into this? When's it right? When's it wrong? Et cetera.
Very bullish on hormone replacement as a general thesis. I think there's a reason that we have a lot of confusion in our current state of understanding and application of hormone replacement therapy. We have a little bit of a support slide, and this goes beyond the scope of this talk, but if you go to the next slide. This is like the most important trial in the history of medicine that no one knows about, that no one knows much about. It's called the Women's Health Initiative. Prior to 1990, this is not something from like yesteryear. In 1990, there had never been a government-sponsored, randomized, placebo-controlled study on women's health outside of childbearing. It's like staggering to think about. Prior to 1990, women were just female males, essentially, in terms of like how we approach the female experience health-wise. There were a lot of women beginning to use hormone replacement therapy and getting their lives turned around, and it provoked, oh my gosh, we don't know if this is good or bad or right or wrong or dangerous or not. So the spirit of it was right. So they wanted to figure out the outcomes on killers of women like breast cancer, dementia, heart disease, and osteoporosis, which are all massively important for females. The challenge of the study was that, in retrospect, looking back, there were a lot of limitations to the study, and there were a lot of real fallacies that have never really caught media attention and really disseminated into the population. Ultimately, the study was stopped because there was an arm of the study where women were experiencing a statistically significant increase in stroke. It was in the estrogen-only arm. So estrogen got blamed as being bad. Turns out it was a rise. It was from 10 to 12 every 10,000 women. And so it was a statistically significant rise, but the absolute rise was very, very small. And the selection group in that was 75-year-old women who were very, very ill to begin with. And after further review, it was the progesterone is actually what is the problem in the Women's Health Initiative, not estrogen. And another big glaring problem is they're using synthetic hormones. These are conjugated hormones made in a factory, altered from pregnant horse urine. This is not estrogen and progesterone that is made from a woman's ovaries. And actually, to this day, we know synthetic progestins are very, very dangerous. Any woman who's on oral contraceptive that is a combo pill, there's a black box warning and it says, blood clot, don't smoke. That comes from progestins. We still know that they're dangerous, but we give them to everyone. So that gets swept under the rug. Basically, it set us back probably 20 or 30 years on our understanding of hormone therapy, and it just didn't impact women. It affected all humans. I've done a ridiculous amount of legwork into this, and in terms of like the biohacking, I don't have the foggiest idea with that stuff. I do know about hormones, but I have a general rule that I need about 50 to 100 hours of deep dive before I'll form an opinion. I've got probably approaching 1,000 hours of studying bioidentical hormone replacement therapy for adults, and I can tell you there's not a single study that is well done on this planet that shows risk. Not one. Most of them are, hard to tell, could be beneficial, could be not, it's indifferent, and there are a few that were done really well that show clear benefit. Anecdotally and experientially, I will tell you as somebody who point guards people's health, as you age above 40, certainly over 50, this is a massive, massive opportunity to play the back half really well.
Great. Before we keep moving on, there's a word that probably 2 years ago no one in this room had heard about, and that's peptide. Now, of course, it's in the everyday nomenclature because of GLP-1s, which we're going to get to, but GLP-1 is a peptide, Ozempic, all the different names, that Wegovy, all those things that we now know about, has been a great investment thesis, right, for these companies that make them. But before we get to GLP-1s, Zane, there's a whole rise in other peptides that biohackers are using to increase testosterone and human growth hormone, to speed healing, to get tanned. I mean, it's like insane, the list of these things that are coming out there. So just tell us a little bit of your thoughts on peptides.
So peptides, they're new here. They're old school Russian performance enhancers for their soldiers, athletes, and cosmonauts going back to the 70s. These were developed in the 70s by a Russian, someone who tried to be a gerontologist, essentially working with older people. So he developed these peptides again for their athletes and for their cosmonauts and soldiers, starting with a segment of peptides called bioregulators, which still most people are unfamiliar with. They're hard to get. Peptide is the building block of, so you start with amino acids, right? Peptides, and then a protein. So if you have a lot of peptides, you end up forming a protein. So these are naturally occurring substances. These are not technically pharmaceuticals, which is where it gets confusing with the GLP-1s. So there are small chains of amino acids that create peptides, and so these are the bioregulators were created also for longevity, specific to certain organs. So they might create the peptides from an organ of a cow or of a pig. They take these amino acids, and then those aminos or peptides would stimulate tissue regeneration or performance enhancement because they would be attracted to our receptors in our liver or our heart or our pineal gland or wherever they are specific to where they came from that animal. So those are the bioregulators that are really more of a longevity kind of hack. And then the peptides we're all hearing about, like the BPC 157, TB 500, there's some that are kind of put on the performance enhancement list. Those were developed. They're also naturally occurring. You probably have these in your body already. You're enhancing the quantity of them, or the volume in your body, but they stimulate, again, tissue regeneration, tissue stimulation, something that's already happening, and you're just kind of amplifying it. They're a gentle nudge. If you were to compare your response to them to, say, actually taking like human growth hormone or testosterone as a concentration, it's not going to be the same, right? You're not going to have the same punch that those do. They're a gentle nudge. They're kind of because they are natural, and you're going to get some enhancement depending on the quality, which is also always questionable. Quality of the peptides, how much you're taking, how consistent you are with them, your body's current metabolic state. There's a lot of variables, but there's decades of research on these. Just most of it's in Eastern Europe.
Interesting.
Yeah, thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah, they keep coming up everywhere, and if anyone's into this topic, your Instagram feed kind of looks like mine, and it's like this peptide and this peptide. And I was like, what is this? So he gets so many text messages from me. What is this? Sorry, I keep dropping stuff. So pivot that to the peptide that people are now so familiar with GLP-1s, and let's talk about weight loss. Huge topic, especially in relationship to longevity, to where we started with metabolic disease. So let's break down some of those core approaches, with nutrition being the obvious one, but perhaps the hardest one. So if we think about nutrition high level, I'd love to hear both your thoughts on maybe the do's and the don'ts that at least could be a building block for people to be thinking about. So Zane, Aaron, you want to start with that, or yeah, please. Well, how do you talk to your patients about it, or do you send them to Zane?
No, nutritional biochemistry is something that for about 8 years of my life, it's scary how much I thought about it. I reverse engineered the fact that 7 or 8 out of 10 of my patients were overweight, obese, and had documentable metabolic disease, and I needed to find a path to actually feel like I was making a difference. So I became obsessed with the adipocyte, the fat cell. Why do we have it? What stimulates it to grow? What stimulates it to shrink? And several things started to become very clear after spending a few thousand hours and treating a few thousand people. And that is, we're all struggling with varying levels of confusion on truth. Truth around this topic has been a little elusive. The answer to each one in this room as to what's the best path to me getting healthy is it depends. And I know that doesn't sell, and it doesn't get a lot of clicks, and it doesn't get, but it really does depend. I, like probably most of you, was taught that if you're overweight, it's a math problem. It's calories in, calories out. It's as simple as that. And while we begin our life, for the most part, as that being the primary truth, that it's primarily an energy imbalance of intake versus output, I would argue that that is probably true until something significant happens, and that's what we started this talk with, which is metabolic disease. Once you start getting the infrastructure set and the stage set for inefficiencies, for dysregulation of energy, it becomes more biochemistry than math. There's still math, calories do matter, but once you have metabolic disease, specifically insulin resistance, it's overwhelmingly biochemistry. So what I would say, if you have weight you need to lose and there is no metabolic disease, then it's math. Hit the gym, pull back the calories, clean up the calories, that's the path. Based on your goals and your time horizon and your tolerance for hard work, you'll come up with your plan. However, if you're insulin resistant and you have metabolic syndrome, that's not going to be enough, probably. We've got to correct the metabolic disease first. And this is where the GLP-1s become really interesting. And I think, Zane, you would, is it 70, 80% for insulin resistance of adult? We're probably, I think the data is unclear, but we are probably approaching nearly 80% of adult Americans who have insulin resistance present. Which means if you need to lose weight and you're experiencing, man, I'm cutting my calories and I'm working out and ain't nothing working, it's because it's not math. And it's not a character flaw either. It's biochemistry. This is where the GLP-1s get really fascinating for me because it's a blowtorch to metabolic disease. And it's the unlock for a lot of people. So
yeah, which I want to come back to the GLP-1s,
yeah.
But Zane, quickly on your perspective on sort of the important do's or don'ts on nutrition.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as simple as possible because I could go down so many rabbit holes. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we didn't have these diseases 120 years ago. So a real simple thing would say, what is new? What is novel to our diet? Because I think it does begin with diet. I don't think it's because we're necessarily moving less or sleeping less. Those things are factors. I think it starts with diet. I think that's our biggest leverage point. It's also the biggest assault. And so what is new in the last 120 years? Well, processed food is pretty simple. We can just look at 1850, we lived off food that came from the farm, or depending where you lived, what you could hunt and gather. So if the food didn't exist 150 years ago, you probably should need it, or it should be like a small percentage of your diet.
It's probably not food.
Yeah.
It's pretty fair.
Yeah, it's not food.
It's probably
It's not food. And so there's the three main ingredients in processed food are processed sugar, highly processed grains, and processed vegetable oils. And I could go a deep dive on the vegetable oils, which could take a half an hour. But I would say those, to my opinion, is those are the primary culprit, and everything else is exacerbating the problem. But if you just avoid processed food and have 90% of your diet coming from a single ingredient, whole food, animal protein, animal fat, whole food carbohydrates, or something that you made at home without vegetable oils, you are way ahead of everyone else. And we can go back that far and see we didn't have disease then. We don't need anthropology. We don't need a lot of biochemistry. We just need a history lesson. It's that easy.
And is it fair to say that those processed things, because they could be additional calories, but that's not the result. It's causing inflammation.
It's causing oxidative stress.
Yeah.
So if you've heard of the free radical theory of aging, or the fact that oxidative stress seems to be the root of all diseases that creates inflammation, creates an immune response, but it's creating the oxidative stress creates a dysfunction beginning with the mitochondria, and so that's our energy problem. We have a poor energy regulation. When you disrupt the mitochondria with oxidative stress, you have an energy problem, and that's the beginning of metabolic disease. That's when we start getting hypoglycemic responses, which create insulin resistance. And I think it's funny talking about move more, eat less kind of thing. The reason we have, or we see that hunger is out of control, or that someone may be overeating and not moving, and for so long, they were saying that was the cause. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a symptom of the insulin resistance creating the hunger, because body fat stops being available for energy. And so that creates a constant need for, what are we gonna have between meals for energy if we can't access body fat? And that is a desire for the next sugar or food. And so hunger hormones are elevated. We start creating more glucose in our liver. So blood sugar elevates, then insulin elevates, and we have systemic baseline rise in our blood sugar and our insulin slowly coming below the surface, and then we start seeing these symptoms, and we're treating the symptoms instead of addressing the root cause.
Interesting. I was reading to go back to the GLP-1s, Aaron, I was reading a piece from one of the scientists at Eli Lilly that stated that they thought within 5 to 10 years, everyone would be on GLP-1s in some fashion. And I thought that was quite an interesting statement, probably could be economic based, all that kind of stuff. But there has been a lot of noticeable changes in inflammation from these GLP-1s. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that's where this is going. But why are these GLP-1s becoming so popular to solve a problem that people aren't able to solve themselves?
I think in the most basic language, we've never had a tool quite like this GLP-1 class of drugs that is so effective at solving the problem. Like how we got here is one layer of this, and like the origin and root cause, and there's a lot of validity in what Zane is saying in the historical context, and but 7 out of 10 adults, they're in the weeds. And there's a two-pronged approach, right? I mean, we've got the youngsters who we need to protect, where this type of thesis deployed in our school lunches in 2 decades would completely change the trajectory of our society, completely. Well, what about if you've got metabolic disease or raging end-stage disease? What do we do with these people? And this is where the GLP-1s are really positioning themselves. To be very clear, there is a dark side to these. These tools, like chainsaws, can be used to cut down fallen trees on a road. They can also be used for bad things. It's just a tool. I try to not be overly romantic with it. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. It's kind of a stoic approach, I guess you would say. It's just a tool, and I recognize that people take it who maybe don't need it, and there are people who take it in a way that they're absorbing downside, that they're either blind to or ignoring or don't care. But I don't think it makes them bad. I think it might be being misused. I'm on record as saying that I think this class of drugs, when it's all said and done, and I totally could be wrong, will end up being the most significant pharmacologic breakthrough since penicillin for humanity. I just don't know, because it's rooted in this idea that like, I think we could get everything else right. If we miss metabolic disease, we're gonna lose as a species.
Yes.
Like it's that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And I've never, in being 8 years in the obesity space and we dance around it. We have cool, interesting things that like incrementally, this is like categorical improvement in metabolic disease. And there's a lot of economics that you can't strip away. I mean, these are trillion-dollar industries we're talking about. So like, impossible to strip the economics out of this, but when you think about what metabolic disease is fueling in terms of, I mean, there's very clear cardiovascular evidence. So like if anybody in this room has heart disease or early stages heart disease and you have a cardiologist, they're probably telling you, you should consider Wegovy, Ozempic of the worlds, because there's very strong cardiovascular evidence that it reduces mortality. Like, and these drugs are brand new. Like they're very new.
I mean, just in the past year and a half, you've seen when you first had those announcements from Wegovy and Ozempic to the invention, it seems like every other month of semaglutides and tirzepatide and retatrutide, and it's like
we're only scratching the surface.
We're scratching the surface, and you're seeing now. I mean, there's the Eli Lilly lawsuit to stop. I think it's Eli Lilly stop compounding pharmacies from making their own
which
versions
is coming, by the way.
this.
So if you're on compounded, it's going away in the next 30, 60 days. It's officially going away.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
You'll have
see.
to go brand name.
So we're in this. It's so cool to be living in the age of innovation in this space, because the things we weren't thinking about 2 years ago are now in our everyday nomenclature, and the things that could be 2 months or 2 years from now we haven't even thought of in this room, and who knows what it's going to be. So it's got to be so fun and challenging for you both to stay on top of everything. Right?
I'm encouraged. I actually feel like a two-pronged approach, it validates the thesis that if we want to prevent metabolic disease, and that's the greatest thing we could do for future humanity, and we do that through changing of food, and we validate that thesis by people who already have it, by targeting the metabolic disease to improve outcomes, you basically confirm scientifically that this is the thing this is the iceberg we need to go around, so that 50 years from now, it's like, oh yeah, there was this stretch of like 100 years where we were really super duper sick.
Wow. So on that advancement side, were you going to add something?
Well, I don't have to, but it's just the GLP. So I wanted to,
Please.
They're peptides, right? So they've taken a peptide that we have in our gut already, and a couple other peptides, one that address the liver and the glucagon release. And so they've basically taken these peptides and created a delivery mechanism. The reason they can patent them is they've created a delivery mechanism that enhances they've been available before, but they weren't as effective, and then Eli Lilly perfected the delivery mechanism. And that's why they can patent and control these in a compound. Now, there's compounders trying to work around that by mixing in things like B12 or other nutrients with them to create their own compound and delivery system, try to work around that patent. And then as the new peptides come out, the compounders are going to be jumping on the new ones before Eli Lilly has a patent to enforce. So there's the business model they can create around something that shouldn't be patentable because it's in your body, is they've created their own delivery mechanism, which has enhanced them to you're getting hundreds to 1,000 times the concentration of GLP-1s and these other peptides that you would have in your body. And that's why you get the appetite suppression. But you also, the effective thing is they lower the blood sugar. They turn down liver's output of sugar. And then that allows the insulin to start coming down, because insulin resistance is the cycle of higher blood sugar, higher insulin, higher blood, and they're feeding each other, and the liver's ignoring the insulin when it should shut it down. So instead of the liver being able to ignore insulin, it's the GLP-1s send a direct signal to the liver, bring your blood sugar down. The problem is that people are only making that their only tool. And they're not taking the opportunity of that appetite suppression to change their habits. And it's very important. I tell everyone, the clients I have that are using it, you need to eat ample amounts of protein to hold on to lean mass because you're going to be wasting as you lose weight. You need to lift weights to try to hold on to lean mass once again and change the way you eat so that you can at some point come off of these. Otherwise, you are going to, if you don't change your habits, as soon as you come off, the weight's going to come back, your habits haven't changed, your body's going to have some bounce back anyway because you've got all this, the inflammation suppression is going to be gone, your appetite suppression is going to be gone. And so you have to change your habits or you are basically committed, you're married customer. To this thing for the rest of your life.
Makes sense. Well, in the theme of advancements, I want to come off of this topic and look at the future of testing and diagnostics. So many people still rely on standard lab work, but we know the advancements in diagnostics can reveal so much more, and this stuff is too changing so fast and new things so often. So Aaron, what are the key tests that doctors who aren't focused on prevention and longevity might be missing today that you would tell an audience like this?
Yeah, I like spending a lot of time on this because the two sides of the coin are prevention on one side and then early optics on the other. Like, scary things that happen to you are not the worst thing that can happen. It's scary things that happen to you and you don't have runway to do something about it. That's where it's bad. And so while you have an effort to delay as long as possible, getting eyes on what could be going on that would be a really bad day that you're going to have no matter what, but now you just have eyes on it early. I think the two, if you have a pencil or you want to take a picture, if you haven't heard of these, I would highly encourage you to take a picture and consider adding these to your health strategy. Clearly is basically a virtual heart cath. A heart cath is where your cardiologist puts you to sleep and goes into your vein and enters into the heart, shoots contrast, and takes a bunch of pictures to look to see if the pipes are blocked. It's also where you go when you're actively having a heart attack. They do the cath and they go in there, and then once they find the blockage, they slide a stent in and they open it up. This is essentially George Jetson version of that, where you get a really, really, really high quality CAT scan picture. And then we upload it to this platform called Clearly, and within a day or two, we have a virtual recreation of your coronary arteries, including plaque burden, the location, and the composition of the plaque. Is it stable or unstable? How many in here have heard of a calcium score? Yeah, so most of the room. Calcium score, there are still people who don't get a calcium score. This is a $50 test. $50. And in my super tiny boutique practice, it's saved 3 lives. It's ridiculous. However, it's also almost obsolete at this point. Like, we still get calcium score calculations, but not in isolation. It comes as a product of this. Calcified plaque is end-stage plaque. Calcified plaque is hard like a rock. It's like a stone. Calcified plaques do not rupture. Plaques that do not rupture do not cause heart attacks or strokes. Plaques that rupture are called soft or unstable plaques. So these are the plaques that are building and growing, and they're still very much alive. They're not at the end. And these get unstable and they rupture. And then if they happen in the brain, we call it a stroke. If they happen in the heart, we call it a heart attack. Calcium scores give you 0 optics on soft plaque. I had a calcium score done. It was 20. And I thought, well, it's not 0. I would have liked 0, but I guess it's okay. 2 years later, I had a Clearly study, and I have 10 times the soft plaque. That's a problem that I was totally blind to. All progress begins with telling the truth. And as I did some truth telling to myself, I realized that punting sleep for 10 years matters. And I accelerated the atherosclerotic process, even though I thought it would be perfect. I highly recommend getting one of these. These can be a challenge to get if you don't have a concierge doctor who has this set up for you, because most hospital systems are going to poo-poo this. And you might say, Aaron, why is that? Politics and economics. This is a real threat to something called a diagnostic heart cath. Because if your cardiologist thinks you might have a blockage and might need to go to a cath to get a stent, they'll first do a stent, a cath to look to see if you have a blockage. In many cases, you could avoid this with a $2,000 test instead of the exposure to all the anesthesia and the OR and the invasive procedure, only to go back and get a stent later. This is very, very disruptive, and I expect it to be very, very poo-pooed for a long time. Although there are some interesting movements on Medicare that there are some whispers that they're going to start paying for this, which is a really good sign for humanity. If you don't have a doctor that has this set up already, it's very difficult to get. So, but ask for it by name. There are some other tools that might even be better. They're on the horizon, too early to talk about. I'm still playing with them. I've done hundreds of these, and I am more bullish on this than I care to admit. The second test is Gallery. So cancer is the number 2 most likely thing to take everyone in this room off the planet, behind heart disease. Of all of the top cancers in the world, let's take the top 50, there are 5 screening tests, routine, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you're a man, you only get 3, because you don't do breast or cervical. There's colon, prostate, and skin are the others. Those are the only routine cancer screening tests we have. Nothing for liver, pancreas, lung, bone, brain, kidney, heart. Like, we just wait until you have symptoms, and then we do a screening test, which by definition is late. This is late if you're symptomatic. And late on killers means you have bad outcomes. Gallery is a fascinating test. This is the slang term you might have heard is called a blood biopsy. You basically go and donate a bunch of blood, non-fasting, and they send it off, and 10 days later they give you a definitive yes or no, we found cancer or not. It also tells you with about 80% probability where that cancer is. This is what I call a sweaty palm test. This is not like oh yeah, we'll evaluate what it might mean. No, it's like you have or you don't have. So you need to be prepared to go down that journey. There are costs involved. It should be less than about $1,000. Insurance will not pay for this. But you can ask for it by name. Reasons not to get it besides cost are there's a 1 in 200 chance it could be a false positive. You need to know that. And that would be pretty kind of like stressful. However, the other way to look at it is 199 people out of 200 know they have cancer and they didn't a day before. It's a pretty big upside. I'll also tell you there's no such thing as a perfect 100% screening test. Not anything. Even crossing the street has risk. This is actually really, really low risk of a false positive. You just need to be aware of it. What we are unclear, because the data is still not very, we only have about less than right around 1 million, many hundreds of thousands of patient data. But what we don't know is this thing so freaking precise that it's catching a cancer at a cellular level before we can see it by MRI? Or is this just a margin of error because to say yes, you might get some things that are yeses, but they're not really yeses. Like there is that like margin of science, like where does it end? MRI right now can see a tumor at about 0.5 millimeter. There might be some really, really good MRIs and radiologists that can read at a 0.2 or a 0.3 millimeter. But tumors don't just spontaneously become 0.5 millimeters, right? So there's this element of like, stay tuned, we don't know. But anyway, these are 2 things, and this is number 1 and number 2, if you remember the slides of killers. So in terms of like majoring in major things, take heart disease, take cancer off the table, then you're managing metabolic disease, you're moving down to like mental health, you're getting into like some really, move down that list. And then you can start managing some more broader things. Don't miss this thing. That's what I would say.
I've done both of these, thanks to this gentleman. And as a professional investor, I love this, how they tie together in our worlds, because when most people think about investing in AI and innovation, they're thinking, oh, we buy NVIDIA and we buy these, chip companies and things like this. I mean, Grail was something that went public, I think, early last year, and has been a phenomenal investment, up over 300% since that period of time. And this is where really researching and understanding this stuff is not only really most important for you all, to everyone to do it for their health, but it's also very interesting from a business standpoint to think about where the world is going with the innovations that are happening.
I'm not paid or do I have any exposure in any of these companies, but I will tell you, anecdotally, it's a baby company.
Yeah. It's a baby.
I talk with my physician friends and they're like, huh? What? What test? Like, it's bonkers.
Yeah, and I'll disclose that I am an investor in Gallery after it went IPO, I can't tell you to buy anything, all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but none of this stuff's approved by insurance yet, and it's changing the world already.
It likely will not be
Yeah.
for quite some time. If you think about the disruptive economics there, if you're finding stage 1 cancers, stage 2 cancers, that means in most cases, surgery is curative. You cut it out, you walk in with cancer, 2 days later you walk out of the hospital cancer-free. That's cool. Stage 3 means it's spread, which means surgery, you'll do it, but you'll follow with chemo and you might do radiation. Like, as a husband of a wife who beat cancer twice with breast cancer, I can tell you one of her cancer infusions was $47,000. One of a 16-week therapy. I can do simple math. I'm not like a mathematician, but like that's a lot of dollars.
Wow.
So, again, I'm not judging, but politics and economics are at play. And so if you say, well, gosh, it doesn't make any sense. Why isn't this available for everyone?
Yeah. So I want to get to the audience's questions here, but before I do, I think a good way to sort of tie this all together is just advocating for yourself. Right? So let's start with that as a fundamental thing. Am I advocating enough for myself when it comes to my health? You know, many people rely on their doctors, but how much responsibility should we be taking as individuals, and what questions should we be asking? So, Zane, what are maybe your perspectives on some of the key signs that someone's not taking enough control or that they should be better advocating for themselves? How would you think about telling someone, you know, what control they should be taking and focusing on?
I believe most people are intimidated by what their doctors tell them to a degree they don't question it or push back. And that's a problem because you're paying them. They work for you. And your health is one of your greatest assets. Time, health, you know. So act like it, you know. There are some scans, like you discussed, and some lab markers that many doctors are still not including on lab work that is preventative and they don't have a way of necessarily, some of them, treating them directly with medication, so they don't include them. But it would give you eyes on your metabolic, like a fasting insulin score, which would be preventative. That insulin is going to go up long before your blood sugar will. It could be a 5 or 10 year process to develop type 2 diabetes, but you get early eyes on it if your fasting insulin is going up. Most doctors do not include fasting insulin. A lot of them don't even know how to read the range properly. So things like where you can start asking for like these scans, like markers on your blood work, where you can get eyes on and be educated in what that should look like and what that means to you as far as, am I in a good spot? Do I need to hustle? Is it emergency time? Is this going to, you know, or should I be expecting symptoms? You know, so it's just, where am I? Yeah. And knowing where you are, especially by 40, like get eyes on this stuff before you're symptomatic. Yeah. So that's prevention. And if your doctor, some doctors, honestly, I've heard stories where doctors won't add it. No, you don't need that. I'm not going to add that. I've told people, have them note that. Tell your doctor, hey, you know what, you don't want to put that, that's fine. I'm concerned about my health. Could you note that in my record? Could you just write that down? They might change their mind right then, because that's a liability issue. But otherwise, you can go get blood work on your own, online, fill out what you want. You could go blood draw locally, they'll send it to you, and then you own your own records. So I think owning your own labs is important. So that that's one way to advocate for yourself, is take charge of your medical records and have copies of them, create your, you know, and know how to understand what the key markers are for preventing disease. Your doctor will help you treat disease, but when it comes to preventing it, it starts with you. And most doctors, they don't have the time or the understanding of how to do that with lifestyle measures.
That's great. Aaron, what would you add?
Oh, man. I think time is super important, but one of the beliefs that I no longer believe is that time is the most important thing. I believe health is the most important thing all time. I would argue that time without health isn't all that valuable. I have had the unique opportunity to spend time with people whose life was quite miserable. And it's just interesting to evaluate area under the curve when you overlay quality of life metrics. It becomes an interesting debate. But certainly those two in tandem, they say, a man with his health has 1,000 problems, a man without his health has but one. And I have the good fortune of taking care of very, very successful people who can write checks for almost anything. Some of them may be you. There are some health scenarios that no check writing will solve. And it's just interesting to spend some time thinking about that. In terms of advocacy, everyone in this room, if you were to double click on an area that you're thriving, whether it's economics, impact in the world, family, relationships, I promise as we evaluate that, there's a tremendous advocacy that you're deploying on your behalf or the thing that you care about's behalf. If there's an area in your health that is not thriving or that you have a unique concern or you don't have any eyes on it at all and you're just kind of like hope is awesome, but it's not a strategy. Like I highly recommend against hope in health. You're thriving because you've been very intentional and you've advocated for you, your vision, your purpose, your mission, your value systems, your family. I would implore you to do the same for your health. This is an offensive activity. I think in the ideal world, you would have a doctor and a patient relationship where the only stakeholders are a doctor and a patient, which is why I love doing medicine the way that I do. I'm not beholden to anybody but my members, so I can align with them day one. And if we're not a good fit, we don't align. It's all good. You could go find your person, but find your person. If you have a physician that you have that relationship, God bless. That's awesome. Lean into that. Bring advocacy to the table. If you don't have that person, go find your person. In the meantime, if you need to do some legwork, I love the idea of getting your own labs and have an element of ownership in your own health the way you do your business. You wouldn't outsource your family or your business to somebody else. You take ownership of that. I would encourage you to think about that with your own health because your community, your family, your purpose, they're all counting on you not dying early.
Well, and I love this, that you alluded to this with your time comment, but the paradigm is shifting where it was lifespan, health span, and then joy span. And those layers are what I think we're all aspiring for. So
I think so.
So let's open it up to the group, see if there's questions. Yeah, Tim.
Thanks very much. This has been excellent. So, Adam, appreciate you organizing this. I have a question about plant-based diets. Could you talk a little bit about that and how important or impactful, or do you guys advocate or recommend a plant-based diet for longevity? As opposed to maybe not, or I'll just leave it at that.
I do not advocate for a plant-based diet at all. So historically, humans have always had meat in our diet. And historically, until about 120 years ago, we didn't have metabolic disease. So if I'm looking in terms of someone's metabolic disease and what's killing us right now, we don't blame a ancient food on a new disease. Or I said that backwards. We don't blame our ancient food for a new disease. And so meat is actually very nutrient dense and probably the most bioavailable source of nutrients that we can get. It's easier to consume and assimilate those. And I consider it a vital part of a whole food diet. I think we do better with animal fats. As I mentioned, the processed oils that are in processed food, those are all created. If you don't eat animal fat, you're left with processed oils or fats, which are part of the third of the processed food that's, I believe, is causing our problems with the disease. So animal fats, animal protein, whole food carbohydrates, to me, is the ideal diet. Whether it's fruit, a whole food grain, that kind of thing. We've been again, eating meat since we were human. And and yet these diseases are new. So it doesn't make sense to blame that. I think we're missing a lot of bioavailable and important proteins and other nutrients, not just protein, also that's in the fat from the animal fat. I think it's identical to our own. We use protein and fat for structure, and so it's like for like. We're animals, we eat animal fat. Plants are better with plant fats and plant fibers and their structure. Plants make great energy foods, but they're not ideal for our structure.
I'm thinking about the blue zones, the backdrop, and what you look at those is your diet, exercise, sociability, all those things. But there's also a genetic component because families, multi-generations of people living in the same geographic region. Where do you guys come out? You haven't mentioned genetics very much in terms of genetic testing and that aspect of getting, as you say, insight into what's going on.
Genetics, depending on who you're talking to, doesn't get enough limelight, or it gets way too much. So a basic thesis around genetics is something called a two-hit hypothesis. There are some things where you're born with a genetic disorder, and it's very evident from birth or near birth that you have such a disorder, and you have two copies of the problem. Or you have something that is just one copy, but one copy was enough. We identify those early. Most all other genetic variables that were inherited, and this is the beauty of what we call Mendelian genetics, where you get half of your genes from mom and half from dad, and you never know which two, and you kind of blend, is that if mom and dad by chance shared the same problem, it's unlikely that you would get both of them at the same time, and if you did, we'd know it pretty early. What ends up happening is if you have this genetic predisposition, in other words, you're a carrier of a trait, you still need an environmental cue to turn it on. So I think of genetics for the most simple analogy as I teach people is think of genetics as a light switch that exists. Some people have the light switch, some people don't have the light switch, but it's still got to be turned on. So it could be smoking, it could be sitting, it could be getting diabetes, it could be whatever that turns these things on. It could be the right person in the right environment eating the right type of diet turns on a thing for them. And certainly when you look at geographic tendencies for longevity or for lack of longevity, you have a hyper focus of these genetic variables to exist. And if it happens to be the right environment to turn it on or off, they'll either be over or under expressed. So I'm dancing around this a little bit because genetics is absolutely, no question, at play. But it needs to be considered. But it's not a just because you have the tendency, will you get it?
Sorry, go ahead.
The other element is, genetics tends to play from the extremes in terms of like the way we understand it. And you have something like 23andMe, or I'm not picking on them, but there's a lot of them that are
Bad
like.
week to pick on them. They just declared bankruptcy if you don't know that.
It's not surprising. It's a handful of snippets of genes, and it grossly underestimates genetics that are at play. Whereas I have some incredible whole genome sequencing with AI overlay, with 2-week updates of like you walk out with like pockets full of hard drives of data that you don't know what to do with. And we're kind of in this white space between we know a lot about it, and we have access to just infinite amount of data that pertains to you, but we don't have the capacity to deploy really meaningful insights as a consequence. So a lot of people, myself included, who maybe 4 years ago you asked me, I'm like going on the all genome, I'm really cooling off on that until we have a little bit more, and I think AI will probably help us because they're smarter than us, it's faster, the computational power and processing speed. I think in the future it will be more useful. We're like early on the big thing, but we need the whole thing, but we also need the ability to cross-reference to get meaningful, actionable. Otherwise, overwhelm sets in, and you don't know what to do with it.
Well, a great real-world example, just personally, that I would love to share, because this question comes up a lot in conversation. I'm a twin. We both come from a father, cardiovascular issues. My twin brother had to get on statins very early. His cardiovascular health was not great. Mine's pristine, thanks to being very thoughtful about it and working through it.
He's an alien.
And but I've never had to do the things that a twin brother, genetically, we are predisposed to the same things, but nurture, whatever you would call it, nature versus nurture, and that the behaviors are the things that turn on that light switch.
And twin studies show us this.
Yeah.
You know, so
And
the answer is and, it's not or.
how many people have done 23andMe? If you have, make sure you log into your account and delete your data if you've not seen that, because they're going to be selling the data through bankruptcy.
I just want to say, yeah, that's their asset. The ex-wife of my oldest brother got that for their 8 children for Christmas, and I told them all, do not do this. You know, this is 6, 7 years ago, and most of them listened to me.
Yeah.
There's a couple, but data is their asset.
Yeah.
So this is the problem.
Yeah.
There's a real moral, ethical dilemma that comes standard equipped with this kind of thing. We're just early, and I would just be very cautious if you go down the genetic route. Have something maybe you're looking for. You know, if you were adopted or there's a real blind spot in family history, that gets kind of interesting to kind of uncover some, is there any obvious things I should be ignoring? But this is where like having your person really help. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but like having someone to help you think about your thinking, like an advocate who has your goals in mind and like your best interest, like fiduciary, like this idea that like, hey, you win, I win, like you lose, I'm losing. So having a relationship like that, it really helps you navigate really sticky things like genetics.
Probably got time for 1 or 2 more. Yes.
Can you talk about cold plunge and sauna, the whole trend?
Yeah.
Is that like, what are your thoughts about that stuff?
I do not know.
I think sauna is where we see more data on benefits to cardiovascular and health and stimulation of heat shock proteins. So I think it's a kind of one of those old world practices that creates stress, adaptive stress. So like exercise or like a fast or like something that creates a little bit of adaptive stress that creates a response that we don't, because we live in a climate controlled world, we're not subject to that kind of environmental stress anymore. And so the idea is to create some of that, right? And even old, Finland, Russia, where these things were developed for health and longevity, it's like they found benefit then to stimulate their health, right? So there is benefit to a measurable benefit. How much we can measure it, I think, is still murky. Cold plunge is beneficial. I think it can be overdone. I think it depending on your stress level, it does create a lot of a stress response, which is the idea of any kind of hermetic stress. But there are people who are kind of overdoing it, dunking their whole head under, like your skull in 34 degree water. I'm not crazy about that idea. Doing it 4 or 5 times a week, I'm not crazy about that for most people because of the stress response. I think a few times a week sounds like something that most people can adapt to. The whole point is, as I mentioned before, we all have added stressors in our life. They all count. And so managing the stress from something like a cold plunge where your adrenals are just going. I mean, as soon as you get in there, your first instinct is to jump out, right? You're mentally telling yourself, stay in here long enough to get the shivers in, a minute and a half, 3 minutes, whatever it is. You're forcing your body in there. Your body wants to get out for a reason. That's stress. And so managing that while you're practicing these things, understand that they are stressors. You have to manage all stressors like you manage exercise, like you manage fasting. They all can be too much. And so I tend to warn people about doing too much. But I mean, is there benefit to creating hormonic stress? Yes. I think there's supposed to be a good dopamine stimulation from the cold plunge as well. But again, it's the dose that is, finding your dose is appropriate. So and again, it's just too early, I'd say, to find measurable benefit to say that you should do this much, this often, and this is what you should expect. It's
Anecdotally, purely anecdotally, I would say if there are benefits in the end, I would not be surprised if they're short term. Like, feel good in the moment because of a thing.
well, like exercise the same way.
Yeah. Well, there's some good evidence for long-term benefit for exercise, but I don't know that.
Only if you continue it.
Yes, a single one and done, exactly. Yeah, if you continue it. So it'll be interesting to see it. instinctively, I think it'll be a short term. And if it was a foot race, I think the sauna would outpace the benefit. We're warm-blooded creatures. It's purely anecdote and instinctive. Like, I'm not sure how much upside a warm-blooded creature has in going into freezing water. That's confusing to my physiology.
That stress your heart, for example. Like,
Well, there's a whole nother spectrum of like, are you even healthy enough to jump into 30? Like, because, I mean, if it shoots your blood pressure to 210 over 120 and you have a stroke, what are we doing?
I wouldn't tell an obese diabetic to start cold plunging three times a week. They've got enough stress going on.
If you're otherwise young and healthy and you're curious, there's probably limited downsides. So I, like a wealth manager, I'm a health asset manager. I'm always trying to maximize benefit, but I cannot divorce myself from risk. And so I have a patient who, amazing guy. Was bored, so he was going on a trip. He's going to Antarctica. And they're doing like this thing where they float around on a boat, and apparently for fun, they jump in the water. I'm like, no, sir. That is not approved. And we joke, and he says, you don't approve? I said, that is not on the longevity plan, sir. He's also a cardiac patient. What are you doing? No. He's like, all right, so I'll just stay on the boat. Yes, with your jacket on. Thank you. You know, like, risk, you know?
Gary?
So first of all, guys, thanks for coming out. And to be honest with you, this is probably one of the best seminars you guys have done, so thank you. This was going to start out with a question, but it's going to start out with a testimonial. So on the Clearly study, my primary signed me up for the study a month ago. Nice. For the reason of economics, where I could get a free CT scan for 5 years. So she said, why not if we can get you in there to do that? So I had the CT scan, and it came back, and everything looked good. They were going to put me in a study. They sent the results up to the headquarters where they're doing a study, and they kicked me out of the study. So I was really disappointed. It hurt my ego because I've never failed at anything, but I failed at this study. But what happened is they set me up with a cardiologist, so this Monday I'll have a heart cath, and it's going to end up with one of two things, a stent or a bypass. Uh-huh. So without this study, I would have never known that.
Wow. That's it right there. That's it.
So I applaud you for putting this up there, and it's huge.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But here's my question for you. As people are aging, right, and people are here with Bernstein, so they have a little bit of money to spend, right? Why is there not, even like here in Nashville, in Brentwood, a clinic for aging health, where they've got doctors and nutritionists and exercise professionals, where people are willing to pay for this service to go ahead and get the older population thinking of health, thinking of how they can prolong their health. Because what's confusing to me, my whole resource, of course, is Google, right? You need to be plant-based. Oh, no, you need to be strictly a carnivore. Oh, no, you need to stress yourself until you pass out. Oh, no. You know, there's so much crap out there that you don't know what to do. Why is there not a concierge clinic of all these professionals that people would pay for?
Stay tuned. You know, I think it's a relatively new model.
Yeah.
I mean, in the grand scheme of doctoring, prior to 95, it didn't exist that anybody knew of. It really hit the market, at least significantly on the West Coast, Seattle specifically, in 1992. It's new to this town. This is a healthcare town. It is the gatekeeper hub and spoke model of HCA. This is like Rome of like the current primary care. And I think a lot of people probably had a pretty good situation for quite a while. If you kind of old school Nashville, and you kind of set up, so it mimics a lot of the old school stuff. But as we've grown, we have the challenges of other growing cities, and we're starting to see. When I started my practice 8 years ago, I delayed launching 2 years for one reason. I couldn't find anybody doing it. And an old mentor of mine used to say, hey, no competition is not a good thing. That means there probably isn't a market for it. You're not that smart, you know? And so I was like, maybe the market doesn't want it. And the more and more eventually I did it, but I think they're coming. We used to do executive physicals where we would do all this, and I was just sharing with my content team, my favorite title of an article we created one time was called Why Everybody Deserves an Executive Physical and Why We Stopped Doing them. I mean, the title tells you everything. What ends up happening is I go hunting, I am going to find something. And then what do? I'm not your primary care. I don't have a relationship with you. It's transactional. And then I have a moral, ethical dilemma. I have to send you back out into the system that was so terrible that it sent you to me to find it. And then your doctor doesn't know what to do with it. If you even have a doctor, a lot of these people will come in without a doctor, and this is like the hack. Well, I'll just go do a really fancy physical. They'll tell me I'm great, and then like nothing. But then you do find things. And I found myself in these dilemmas. So I think until there's at scale enough, I don't know that's going to show up. There are some clinics starting to pop up. I am noticing. I'm actively busy taking care of my people and building my own thing, so I don't like survey the landscape all the time. But
Well, and I think it goes to the advocacy conversation too, because it's the corresponding pieces that make up the whole. And I'm proud to know these guys and to work with them both. And
these are new. These technologies are brand new. So like I found out about Clearly 3.5 years ago. So, and it's just now getting to where it's becoming, I mean, many people in here had never heard of it. So they wouldn't even know to look for a clinic like that. But I'm really proud that you got it. And I'm very excited for your future. Because whatever's in there is in there, and now you know about it.
Yeah. Well, we're going to keep you on schedule and get you out of here. I want to say a huge thank you to Aaron and Zane. Big round of applause. I'll also mention that they're both authors as well. Dr. Wenzel has recently written a book called 90 is the New 60, and Zane has written a book called, don't tell me, Kicking Ass After 50. And so certainly keep an eye out for those if you want to find those. And if you do want to get more information or talk with these two, just reach out to the advisor that invited you, and we can get you in contact. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks for Barton Law. Do you guys want to say anything else? Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Danielle.
Again, thank you guys so much. And thank you for your comment, by the way, in the back about how much you enjoyed this topic. Obviously, as wealth advisors, health is very important to us, so much so that we decided to talk about health and longevity today and not talk about the market. So
Nice break.
Great timing for that, right? But anyway, I just want to thank you guys for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to JK for final remarks.
Just letting everyone know, we do have almost a full calendar. If somebody wants to host August 21 and somewhere there in December are still open, so just contact me. But we want you to join us next month. We'll be in Brentwood. That's easy location right off the interstate. So don't panic, you Nashville people. But really, thanks for being here, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your attention. It's the most valuable thing you could ever offer me, and I don't take it for granted. You can find out more about today's episode and all of the other resources we have at brentwoodmd.com. Be sure to check out all the other content we've created by searching Brentwood MD on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. If our content has ever provided you with value, it would mean the absolute world to me if you subscribed to our show and left a review. This helps us ensure more people just like you can find our content so they can begin their journey of optimizing health. To learn more about the concierge services we provide our members, visit brentwoodmd.com. And now for the obligatory disclaimer. This podcast is for general information only and does not constitute the practice of medicine or the giving of medical advice, as no doctor-patient relationship has been formed. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should seek the advice of their own medical professional providers.